Thanks very much, Adam. Really, really excited to be here talking to you. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. We're really excited to speak to you. Author, public speaker, activist, so many different titles. It's a real pleasure.
It's a pleasure to be here. I have too many jobs.
Too many jobs. Okay. So, I was reading your book and I really got to thinking about a few things after. Your book really made me think in a way I hadn't thought for quite a long time. And I think that really speaks to the sort of intellectual desert, I suppose, that we live in at the moment, right? Mm-hmm. Where the kind of the only things that are on offer on the, philosophical buffet are collectivism, tribalism, irrationality, everything that we see, right? Today, especially when it relates to things like, the gender madness and intersectionality. So how did you get to be in a position where you were able to write this book? You're not a writer. Well, you are a writer, right? But that's not, tell me, how did that happen?
Well, I would rewind like a year prior. Mm-hmm. I wanted to write a book as like a legacy thing for my son. Mm. And the only thing I really had was like questioning things, mm-hmm. right? Because I think it was a period where I realized certain things that I believed, mm-hmm. Or I noticed areas where I had a flaw, like I didn't question certain things. Sure. And I found out the truth, and I was like, I should have questioned this. So it was something of that nature. It's not as disorienting as me explaining it. Is how
no. Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense.
I just didn't have a book idea. I think I sat down like one day and that was it. But it was always in my head that I wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. And then George Floyd happened. Okay. Along mixed in with COVID, obviously. Mm-hmm. And it was, for me, it was less about George Floyd scenario, which was a tragedy, mm-hmm. but it was more so about the inability to ask questions. Okay. We're not allowed to ask any particular questions that, why is this happening? Does this narrative make sense? Mm-hmm. Nothing like that. You're expected to just shut up and accept the narrative. Mm-hmm. And, for me, I wasn't a public person whatsoever. I didn't really even use social media. Mm-hmm. Wasn't really a fan. But it's one thing to choose not to speak. It's another thing to feel like you're not allowed to. Right. And that is one of those things that made me want to say something. So mm-hmm. I initially just went into free speech forums and just asked like the initial question, am I alone? Like, am I going crazy? And it's always nice to find out that you're not going crazy.
You've explored a lot of different topics on your phenomenal Substack, which I really highly recommend to anybody. But one of the articles that really caught my attention mm-hmm. and really made me sort of first of all, it totally made sense to me, and then I really thought about it for a while, and I sent it to a lot of people, and that was you wrote about the podcasts where they bring on very unintelligent, sorry, I shouldn't say unintelligent, they appear unintelligent girls for kind of humiliation, right? And you sort of explored the psychology of that, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I specifically used an example. I can't remember the girl's name, mm-hmm. but it's more about people don't recognize the signs of people who went through childhood trauma, mm-hmm. And especially stuff like sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. So I'm listening to her story and I'm like, that's not normal. Mm-hmm. Like that should be one big red flag.
Yeah, a girl who was doing OnlyFans, right? Right.
She was. Well, I think I couldn't remember if she said she stopped doing it or she was doing it. Mm-hmm. But I know she was doing it at one point. Mm-hmm. But the big red flag for me was, I think she said she was addicted to porn at 10. Okay. And I said,
and that's a huge issue for PEC. I mean, the pornography issue from these kids is a massive issue. Yeah. So yeah, tell us about that.
And I mean, I know people make it sound like, oh, porn just happened to exist there. But when mm-hmm. you say you're addicted, that mm-hmm. means that you are getting something from it. Mm-hmm. And that means that you are pleasuring yourself as well. Mm-hmm. What 10-year-old learns about one, porn, so someone exposed her to it, and two, to pleasure herself to it. So usually that's an indicator that she's being abused or she might be being molested. I mean, even back in, I remember like in the 80s, they would have like these, the pervert episodes for like these sitcoms.
Okay.
You know, like Different Strokes has one.
Okay.
Where, you know, the guy's, he seems like a nice guy. He's got toys in his place. And, he's like, oh, we're going to watch something. And like, what are these naked people doing? You know, but they're showing like, this is what pedophiles do.
Of course.
They groom you by showing you sexual content and say, no, it's fine. It's perfectly normal. And then that's how it starts. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm like, no one picked that up. Of course not. They didn't pick that up. They just heard how she had, what was it, sex with 8 guys in one night or whatever, some ridiculous number. And I was like, yeah, she's clearly hypersexual because she was molested when she was a kid.
Oh,
so, you know, it's that kind of thing. And for them, it's the shock factor. But the girl, of course, she got into drugs and stuff to medicate for all this stuff. And by the way she was talking, she mentioned her mother. Her mother didn't sound all that impactful to her. So it might have been, if I was to guess, probably had boyfriends and, you know, wasn't that highly involved. And she didn't mention her father. So, you know, I think you add all these things up, it's no wonder that she's sitting here on this podcast and she doesn't have a filter as far as like, one, this isn't normal. Two, maybe you shouldn't be talking about this, right? But, you know, when you do drugs and stuff like that, it messes with your head too. So
So you're a sex addict. Okay, so what does that mean?
It can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. I'm also a recovered addict, but sex was kind of like my switch away from opiates. So once I got clean off of opiates, it just kind of transformed itself. I mean, it's always been a problem, but it really...
Oh, so you said you were also addicted to opiates, correct?
Yeah.
Which ones? Or
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you can say that on it. Sorry, I forgot if...
Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
It is. That's fine.
It's whatever.
It happens. Okay, so how long have you been clean on those?
I've been clean on those since I was like 18 and a half.
Okay.
After like my last OD, and it really scared me. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And is it pretty common for people who have sex addiction to also have other kinds of addictions?
Yeah. My mom's an alcoholic, so obviously it's genetic, but she kind of knows, has always known that I've had an addictive personality. So
yeah. So how did your sex addiction manifest?
It looked like a lot of different things. I think it started with can I say boom?
Let's say adult content.
Okay.
Adult content.
Yeah, it started with adult content when I was like 9, 10 years old or something like that. Yeah. So, and I kept getting addicted to it and I like could not stop watching it. And then eventually it got to a point where like I was 19 and I got kicked out of my house because I was like bringing over 6 dudes a night. Like it just was never enough. Enough was never enough. So, yeah.
What? Wait, 6 dudes a night?
For like a consecutive week. Yeah. Yeah.
So 6.
And I think also these we've written about OnlyFans quite a bit on with Partners for Ethical Care. We really do try to also be honest, I think, about this. A lot of the teenage girls, right, that whose mothers reach out to Partners for Ethical Care, or we find out about them, or they join one of our support groups on Facebook or whatever it is. OnlyFans and pornography is a real, theme that runs through a lot of this. And, the real sad thing is about that is the average girl on OnlyFans makes $176 a month, right? And I think that, these podcasts that kind of you're referring to, they paint this incredibly distorted, idea. They are really sending these tremendously negative ideas, right, to young women and to young men, right? Because how many girls end up writing to me saying, hey, how can you help me get my get my pictures off. I'm 18, I made a mistake, I screwed up, or, I was interested in the money. I didn't think about the long-term consequences. And that really, really made me think. So I have a question. Maybe it's a little bit controversial, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. So most of the teenage girls that we see in the kind of the social contagion aspect of the kind of a transgender movement, they're mainly middle class white girls. And I mean, that's a huge statistical theme. And I wondered, why do you think that is? Why do you think that specifically white girls between, the ages of 12 and 12 and, 22 are having so much social anxiety, or feeling that they need to identify into some kind of special victim class? Why? Yeah, because you've really explored that quite a lot in the book and also in Substack. So I'd love to understand, like, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I would say it could be two major things. It could be cultural, as to why someone is or isn't getting involved in it. Like, I don't often see, I know they exist, but I don't often see Black biological girls getting into this.
Also, statistically, Planned Parenthood does release their statistics, and I mean, the statistics are, I mean, it's quite frankly, Black people aren't falling for this, which is amazing. But I often, it's a real theme and it's something that people are really trying to get to the bottom of. And there's a lot of different theories out there that perhaps these girls are feeling because there's such a sort of, I think maybe that's intersectionality, or I don't know if it's kind of just the woke nonsense, or
it could also be that they're exposed to it in different ways than other cultures. So for example, like victimhood, for example.
Yeah.
I think a lot of schools in America are teaching victimhood, but it just looks different. So like the school that my son went to did a lot more racial victimhood than gender. Doesn't mean that we didn't have some outside group come in to ask them what their pronouns are. But to them, they're just like, what is this? Like, it just seemed weird.
Right.
Whereas maybe the nicer schools that are predominantly white are getting the liberal arts graduates that went from, the mid-range to top universities who are coming in there who are highly proficient in all this nonsense.
Well, that's precisely it. They are highly proficient in absolute shit.
Yeah.
There's no substance to this idea. I mean, I don't really know if it's even intersectionality, because it's like you said, it's just absolute drivel. So go on a little bit about the dogma of the affluent. Like, what is it doing to society? Because we at Partners for Ethical Care, we definitely think it's doing something to society.
For one, it is telling people that they must change society, right? Because it must be changed. And only they can do it, right? So it's anointed them as the change makers of the world. And that is the biggest problem. They're not listening to us, right? They're like, you don't know.
Right.
I already went to the best schools. We had the best professors.
I read all the bullshit.
I read it all. And you're ignorant. And I get it, you're ignorant.
Yeah.
But let us do what we're going to do. And it's that kind of condescending viewpoint that is becoming more and more apparent. And not to say, we'll use Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York. It's not to say that she is a leftist. I don't think she is. I think she's like a typical kind of old school Democrat. However, because it's the religion of the affluent, which I would say she's affluent, and she's around other affluent people, they start to believe their own bullshit. And so they start saying stuff to each other.
Right.
And you think to yourself, in what world, in what environment would it sound okay to say that there are Black children in America that don't know the word computer?
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Right. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's not,
don't have internet and
right. I've heard that as well.
Or don't know how to use the internet. That was a great one. I don't know if you saw that street interview.
Yeah.
That was
can't get IDs. I've been around Black people my entire life. Okay. They all know how to get an ID. Okay. I've heard all types of complaints from people. Okay. I never heard, man, I can't get an ID. Like, I've just never heard that because it's not a thing. Okay. Like, but they tell each other that.
Young Black kids growing up in the Bronx who don't even know what the word a computer is. They don't know. They don't know these things. And I want the world open up to all of them, because when you have their diverse voices innovating solutions through technology, then you're really addressing society's broader challenges.
You know, there's a classic video, I can't remember his name, Ari.
Ari Shaffir.
Ari Shaffir.
No, Ari Shaffir.
Or is that a comedian?
That's a comedian. Yeah. No, I know Ami Horowitz. Yeah,
Ami Horowitz.
Yeah. That's he's a wow. Yeah, he certainly revealed a lot of things.
Right.
Yeah.
Going the steps of Berkeley. They're less likely to.
Yeah.
And they believe it.
It's disgusting.
And here's the thing: when I was a Democrat, I was kind of like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Right. And that's the tribalism.
That's the tribalism, right?
You start to rationalize stuff like
completely.
But when you really think about it, like, I don't know anybody who's like that.
Right.
Why wouldn't they be able to?
It's a caricature.
Right.
It's a caricature.
So that's why, and I wrote in the New York Post piece, like, that's why I chose independence. Because this is the type of foolishness they tell each other, and they believe it.
Totally.
And no one questions them. It's not until they say it out loud in public that even other Democrats are like, whoa, what is this? It's that absurd. And I think that's where we're talking about the affluent. This is the type of affluent stuff. So that's why
luxury beliefs.
Yeah, it's luxury beliefs.
Luxury beliefs.
You know, that's why in the article I was characterizing her as, you know, a country club Democrat, right? Where they just tell each other, yeah, I heard those poor Black kids don't even have shoes. You know, it's just like, you know, it's just, it's that type of stuff. And I think for me, this is one of those areas where I'm able to speak on it, not just because I'm Black, but because I've been poor, I've been homeless. And guess what? I knew what a fucking computer was.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're mentioning also about the kind of sort of condescending ways that people talk to you.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of the time, we at Partners for Ethical Care, we have parents that are coming to us, and they're finding things very, very difficult. Their kids are going through, maybe they're identifying as non-binary, or it's a teenage girl and she all of a sudden wants to start wearing a binder, and they kind of. A lot of the time they come to us in a real state of bamboozlement, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the time it's because they have gone to some kind of guidance counselor or, some quasi authority figure who has talked down to them and basically told them, you dumb boomers, you just don't get it. This is the way things are. And I know because I've studied the nonsense, right? and they come out and they feel like I'm 1,000,000 years old. I'm stupid. I don't know the right thing. I'm a bad parent. I'm a bad person even because they know instinctively this is wrong. Okay. There's nothing wrong with my kid is going through a phase in life. There's zilch wrong. And they go to these people in authority because they're expecting to hear some kind of rationality from them. And they just get the dogma, the affluent dogma. I mean, these ideas, right, that are coming from, I don't know, Judith Butler or one of these kind of academics. Okay, academic circles, right? Whatever, right? You can sit around all day and smell each other's farts, right? But this is not for general consumption because it's basically trash, right? It's total nonsense all the way down. Yeah. So I really, what do you think? You've interviewed now a number of detransitioners, right? You've interviewed Chloe on the podcast Breaking Bread.
I'm Chloe Cole, and I am. What would I call myself? I guess you could say that I am a detransitioned activist. I'm from the Central Valley of California, and I speak mainly on the issue of gender transition. Mm-hmm. I went through the process of going through gender transition while I was a child. So between the ages of 12 to 16, I was identifying as a boy. At 13 was when I started the medical process with Lupron to suppress my puberty, testosterone to masculinize my body. And at 15 years old, I underwent a double mastectomy, which was the removal of my breasts. And when I was 16 years old, I realized that I wanted to have children one day, and that I still very much was a feminine woman. But I had some trauma that was unresolved. I was afraid to be a woman, of the responsibility that would come with that. But in the end, that was what I wanted to be. And it was the only thing that I could be. And so I stopped transitioning. And I've been speaking out about my experience of having gone through that as a kid. And against the use of these treatments in children. Mm-hmm. And for the rights of parents to raise their children to be healthy, fully functional adults, and to be informed by doctors, by parents.
Like, what was your experience when you first started to, first of all, what did you think about this 5 years ago?
Oh, it wasn't even a thing. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the thing about it, is no one talked about it.
Right.
Do we know that there are people who felt this way? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we lived our lives and moved on. Mm-hmm. And honestly, and this goes back to like kind of the propaganda piece. Mm-hmm. Are there people getting caught up in this? Yes, absolutely. However, I think there's an element within the media that is exaggerating the commonplace. Like whenever you see stories of guy wearing dress in locker room, right? And it's like in some random place in America. Mm-hmm. This is a big country. This country is basically a continent.
Of course it's a continent.
So like someone is looking for this stuff.
Yeah. I agree. And I also feel the same. Yeah. And I think also there's on social media, we always have to be very, very careful that there's deliberate actors who are out there to try to hijack the algorithm, right? Or to make something of enormous prominence because they want to cause social discord. Yeah. And you really saw that with Russia is known to have done this, right? To fund both aspects of a protest movement, right? Or to, like you say, elevate these. I mean, we've always had perverts that have come into women's bathrooms and flashed them. I mean, it's terrible and it should not happen. But it's always kind of something. But I think the issue really is that they're being encouraged. The law is not protecting the ladies, right?
Right.
But
in some cases, that's the other part. Mm-hmm. People presume that the law isn't. So there might be a place in America, maybe let's say Portland, where they're putting men in women's prisons, right? But that's not the case everywhere. And so if you see some video from Idaho of some guy going in Planet Fitness into the women's locker room, well, guess what? That guy's going to get arrested. He's going to go to jail, right? So everybody takes the outcome from one scenario in a different location and presumes that if the same scenario happens the next time, that it'll be the same outcome. And that's not the case. So I've seen that when it comes to crime. They're like, when is there going to be accountability? I was like, what are you talking about? The guy was arrested. He's being prosecuted. What else do you want? But they presume that, oh, well, this one story I saw and the guy, it didn't seem like anything happened. I was like, no, pretty much all of them always get arrested. They always go to jail. But they just want you to think that they're trying to black pill people. They want them to think that these bad things are happening and there's nothing you can do about it and no one's doing anything about it. And so this is life.
Right.
But actually I want to go back to, you were talking about like the parents who are having these let's say, intellectual educators. They like to call themselves educators now. These educators who are telling them, you just don't know what you're doing. This goes back to, I'm trying not to sound too like religious sounding. But like, I was just talking about listening to your instinct as like a God-given gift, right? You're supposed to listen to yourself. Anything and anyone that tells you to ignore God's gift, what does that tell you? There's something demonic about it. So that's why I think when it comes down to the core of it, these particular ideologies where they tell you to harm children, that's demonic, right? That's not good. We know that. You instinctively know that.
It's just rationality.
They play on your fear. They play on your, they want you to doubt yourself. Self-doubt isn't of God, right? You're supposed to listen to yourself. You're supposed to listen to that gift. So that's why confusion, I heard someone say this, confusion is of the devil. Clarity is of God, right? So if you're confused about a particular topic because someone is yammering on, no. Listen to your conscience. That's what God gave you. And your conscience is saying, I don't care what this doctor is saying because he looks like a weirdo. I don't care what this guidance counselor is saying because they sound crazy. I know that cutting off my daughter's breast is not good. There's nothing good about it. And if my daughter can kick and scream right now, but I know that I am saving them from heartache in the future. And we have to ignore people who tell us to ignore ourselves.
Okay, so how not to lose your nip. So as always, follow your own surgeon's instructions, but this is what I recommend my own patients do. So first of all, it's rare that you completely lose a nip. The nip doesn't just all go away, but certainly if they're not taken care of properly, they may not take as well. And typically what that looks like is you can lose some projection or the nipple sticking out. So usually the best thing for those nips in the first few days and weeks after surgery is going to be not to let them dry out. Oftentimes the top layer of the nip in a process, what we call epidermolysis, will actually die off, and that's when the nips are going to their zombie phase and look really bad. But during that time, we're just going to keep going and keeping them moisturized. And how I recommend to do that is typically just a little bit of antibiotic ointment on the nip itself, not the surrounding skin. And then we do a band-aid to protect your clothes.
There's a word actually for this. It's that I really love. Ayn Rand uses it quite a lot. It's evasion, right? It's literally saying I am going to ignore objectivity. I'm going to ignore rationality. I'm going to literally look at the world and go like this, right? It's completely ignore everything. And we see evasion that really kind of is a running theme through this sort of movement. You mentioned black pilled, right? And I wonder what you kind of make. What do you think is next? What do you think is going to be the next insane movement that takes off? Because the right now, the kind of the American right, is sort of going a little bit into, I would say also authoritarianism, right? Admiring them. I see kind of people kind of excuse things like Putin, right? Or
I've seen them say that
idealize him.
The Taliban is kind of lit.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because they don't want to put up with this gender ideology. It's like, okay, so one thing.
Right.
Like, I'm pretty sure you shouldn't be idolizing the Taliban. But that
is a serious thing. I mean, that really is, we all know, like you can't dive into crazy gender stuff in Afghanistan or in Russia, right? They're not going to put up with it. But these are terrible authoritarian regimes that we should not admire. We're freedom-loving people who, for the last half a decade, have been shouting about our ability to have free speech, right? And so all of a sudden, what we're admiring authoritarian dictators because their house is in order a little bit better than ours. It's like, well, if that's the price, then it's do you know what I'm trying to say? It's like the reflection is because the left has gone so nuts. Then the right is also going completely, in my opinion, nuts, away from rationality.
They're eventually going to meet.
They've met already, I think.
They've actually met. Progress we can hope for progress. So I've seen progress in my lifetime. I know we're in a little bit of a regress, but I think some of that regress is an illusion.
Right.
This is
why do you think it's an illusion?
Because who are the messengers of this new narrative? It is the affluent. It is the upper class. These are the people who are saying everything you once knew and once believed is actually wrong.
Yeah.
And then you look, you're like, that Anchor's a millionaire. The people who are running this $1 billion corporation, like you just start looking at everybody who is propagating this message has a stake in it,
right?
And a high stake in it. And then you start looking, all right, well, where do these people go? They're all coming from Harvard, Princeton, and you start looking. This is just a factory of this ideology. And then you start looking at the private schools like Exeter, which is the top private school in the country. So the top 1% kids go there, and then they head their way into Harvard and Yale and so on and so forth. And so and I know this because I've talked to people, they get fed that stuff there.
What do you mean?
Like if you're talking about leftist ideology or critical race theory and things like that, all this stuff that we think is just in colleges, it's like,
how does that, explain to me. So how would something like gender ideology or critical race theory or one of these, dangerous theories, how does that work in education in the, as far as you see it in the early stages?
You mean,
how do they apply it? Yeah, how do they apply it? Because they do a lot of social and emotional learning, right?
It depends where it is, because it shows up in different ways. So in some schools, it might have one flavor. In other schools, it might have a different flavor. It might show up as a math equation, right? But instead of it being like 1 + 1 = 2, it would be there is this person who has privilege. And you add this, like it might be something of that effect. It could be down to the type of books that they give the kids. It could be down to exercises. We don't often talk about these organizations that come into schools, like my son's school, that come into these schools and ask kids all of these questions and intrude on them. What's your gender? What's your sexuality? And I'm like, why are you asking my 15-year-old son what his sexuality is?
Like, if he wants to talk about it, he'll talk about it. Yeah.
And it's not even the school, which, and this is one of those reasons, like I took my son out of the school and we did homeschooling. Why wasn't I notified that this was happening? Like, shouldn't I know that there are going to be a bunch of adults
because
coming in?
You're too stupid to understand what is good for your kid. I mean, that is the messaging, right? You are too old and uneducated and stupid to possibly understand what we need to do for your child.
Well,
that is literally the mindset. That is literally the mindset.
But I'll say this. The solution to all of this is conversations with our children. Like anybody who's listening to this is way more aware than most people.
Right. Yeah, you're already here.
You're already here.
Right.
So you have to, I've had these conversations with my son, I would say since he was 12, 13, right? Where I really started having dialogue with him about it. He's 18 now. And, I would show him, sometimes I would show him like Ben Shapiro videos.
Okay.
But they served a purpose because, not that Ben Shapiro is right. But I'm like, listen to what they're saying. And they're like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Like, so even my 13, 14-year-old son, because you're like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Right. So I'm exposing him to this. Why? Because when he hears it at school, you need to tell me. And that's what he did. So
and what did you do about it?
I believe I contacted the school and tried to inquire, like, what was this all about? And I got some answer. There is no good answer as to why I wasn't notified that there were a bunch of adults asking kids what their sexuality is.
Yeah, and it's a running theme. It's always, it really is always occurring. It's so insidious. And 15, to be honest, is pretty old. Like we hear it from like, we hear people talking to kids about it like 8, 9, 10. I mean, really gross and insidious and pedophilic and the kids feel ashamed because they don't want to talk about this kind of stuff. And they kind of almost say to them, your parents won't get it. they're not going to understand. They're too old. They were never kids. Life has changed. Sexuality has changed. Age has changed. All of these concepts are malleable, right? In their kind of mindset.
You know what? You just made me think we need to bring back sitcoms. I feel like all these things that we kind of subtly warn people about, like that person who comes over and says, don't listen to your parents. That was a sitcom episode.
Run away. Yeah, you got to run away. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, don't listen to that person. That's the bad person in the episode.
That's the bad guy.
Right? So when you see it in life, when they roll up and say, get in the van, you don't do it. Why? You saw the episode. You don't get in the van.
You don't get in the van.
We need to bring that.
You need to bring that up. and also I think as well, for the future, we want to also think about, because in my opinion, what the right and the left are both offering are different forms of collectivism, right? And the right is now kind of descending into this rejection of the Enlightenment and rejection of the individual, right? And a lot of them kind of say that the reason that we're in this situation is because of individualism. And it's complete nonsense, okay? Yeah. None of this is because of individualism. All of it is collectivism. I've never met someone who's engulfed in gender ideology who was an individual. They're just a person who's complete set of dogma, complete set of beliefs. And I would love to see that in the future as kind of this think towards a post-collectivist future for ourselves, because we're certainly living in we're living in very interesting times.
Well, you're not wrong about the collectivist part, but that's not the motive. The motive is power. That's what it always is. So whether the left is doing or the right is doing, the motive is power. Notice. Was it the past, let's say 3-4 years, everybody's screaming about free speech is on the right. Why?
Right.
Why were they screaming about it? Because they didn't have the power. Well, now things are starting to turn.
Yeah, things are starting to turn, right.
Right? And all of a sudden, now that they have the power, you know what? Some speech is, we got to... Now it's a little bit different. Now they're not, so all of a sudden they're not free speech absolutists anymore. It's some speech that we should restrict. Now, here comes the authoritarians back. Why? Well, you can only be authoritarian if you have power. That's what all this is about. And now that they have some power, now they want to flex.
They want to have more.
They want to have more.
Right.
It's the same thing. Both sides do the same exact thing. So the motive is always power. Collectivism is just a vehicle.
Yeah.
That's it. Same thing with the left when they use racism. It's just a vehicle. They don't give a shit about black people or anybody else.
Yeah, sure.
It's just a vehicle.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's always it's just a method. It's just the conduit, right? It's always just the conduit. So yeah, I'd kind of finishing up, I'd love to hear your kind of final thoughts on for the parents who are listening about what kind of messages do you have about kind of what you've learned about the kind of the gender psychopathy, right? That's the gender insanity it's cult, of course, it's absolutely a cult and a religion. But how do you see it, and how do you see it kind of panning out?
How do I see it panning out? I think some of this, maybe people won't like this, but I think some of it is a trend. Just in the same way that it is a social contagion. Well, social contagion always lasts. It manifests into something else.
Sure.
We talked about, or it's been
Islam.
talked
about. That's the one. That's the latest one, right?
That's the latest one. They were saying like some of the same girls today who are doing this would have probably been anorexic years ago, right? And their friend is bulimic. Now I'm bulimic. It just that was the social contagion of the time,
right?
At the time, we would have these talk show episodes talking about anorexia and bulimia, right?
And now they're all identifying as non-binary and they're boys, and it's just the latest way to be special, right?
Yeah, it's either the latest way to be special, or for girls who are struggling fitting in. They're kind of following along. But this is one of those areas where I would say having a strong, healthy father in their life, to help reassure them that there is nothing wrong with you. God made you the way he made you. There's nothing wrong with that. And I have a friend who was dysphoric when she was younger.
Okay.
And, she's thankful that she didn't grow up in today's age, because she would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
But her mother said, "You're beautiful." And she constantly reinforced, "There's nothing wrong with you. You're beautiful." And she was able to kind of move forward from that and grow into her own.
Mm-hmm.
When you're going through that age, like, your body's changing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one summer you're flat chested, next summer you have breasts. Like, your body is changing.
Yeah.
And you have to get used to that. Your hormones are changing. You have to get used to that. Same thing with young men. Your hormones are changing. You have to get used to it. But you also need someone in your ear to reassure you that there's nothing wrong with you. All this is normal. I grew up without my father, and I didn't have that. When I wasn't dysphoric, but I didn't have that reassurance and that confidence boost. So that's, how my life turned out for many years.
Thankfully. I also had something really important that I wanted to ask you. What do you think that the Black Trans Lives Matter movement was all about? That kind of moment that we had in 2015? Because I wrote about it on my website. I wrote about it kind of from a statistical perspective. It was Elizabeth Warren. She was the one that read out all of the names of these trans-identified males who had died. And when you actually went through the names of each of these victims, they weren't, they were killed by their partners, or they were killed in, by accident, or got into a fight over a parking ticket, or, there was no instances of like a racist, transphobic, hate crime. Right. And I said to myself, why on earth is she going out there and pandering like this and pushing this narrative that there's this group of people who are being continually and utterly victimized to the point where, they're in imminent danger of murder. When two of the trans-identified males that she read the names out of, they died from natural causes in their apartments. Like, this is not right. This is not correct. I wanted to get your opinion on that. What on earth was that 2 years kind of insanity about?
It's just a vehicle.
Just a vehicle?
You just add up the intersectionality points.
Right. It's just intersectionality. We should have added disabled, right? That would have been better.
That would have been a stretch.
That would have been a stretch, right? I mean, but
I think it's just a vehicle. And honestly, when it comes to people like Elizabeth Warren, I think often they're just fed stuff. They got staff. Their staff Google stuff, and they get something from some activist website, and they just send it to them, and then like, here's the talking point for the day. Like, I've talked to people who are behind the scenes. They often don't know, or if they don't know, it's either they don't know or they're being fed stuff to say it because that's what we're supposed to say, and then they do it.
Good to see you, Senator. So, Senator, if elected president, what should LGBTQ Americans expect from the first 100 days in office?
So good to be here with you. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to show you. Dana Martin, Jasleen Ware, Ashanti Carmen, Claire Legato, Malaysia Booker, Michelle Tamika Washington, Paris Cameron, Shinell Lindsay, Chanel Spurlock, Zoe Spears, Brooklyn Lindsay, Denali Berry Stuckey, Kiki Fantroy, Pebbles LaDime Dime Doe, Tracy Single, Bailey Reeves, Beloved Slater, Jalea Jamar. 18 trans women of color who have been killed so far this year. It is time for a president of the United States of America to say their names. Donald Trump has a strategy. He's got a plan. His strategy is turn people against people. He knows what this strategy is. This strategy is one of, as long as people are turned against each other, then maybe they won't notice that Donald Trump and his corrupt buddies are robbing the rest of this country of its wealth and its dignity.
People didn't like it. That was a bad move, right? That was a really bad move for her candidacy because, articles came out saying this is bullshit. I mean, she's literally lying to people to create a narrative of like, I need to be the one that's going to save this group of people from imminent death, and if you don't vote for me, there's going to be mass murder. Yeah. It was like very very manipulative, and I'm glad people actually saw through it in the end. And so what do you see for the next year? Just to kind of close things out, what are you going to be doing? Jen, what about the gender thing? You think that's going to get thrown in? Because I saw Robert Kennedy Jr. kind of made this statement, which people were quite kind of liking the sound of,
Yeah, I think that it is losing steam. Mm-hmm. I think probably within the next 3 to 4 years, there's going to be lawsuits.
There's already lawsuits.
Yeah, but even more. Mm-hmm. And
if anybody wants to join, come to Transition Justice. If you're looking for a lawyer, we would love to help you out.
Yeah, I just think that there's going to be lawfare that's going to be involved. Mm-hmm. That's going to be the big emphasis. Right. To having these institutions, doctors say, it's not worth it.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine that. Okay. Well, listen, we've loved having you, and I would really love us to do this again in the near future. Yeah. And just before we kind of go, where can everybody follow you, Adam?
I definitely go to my Substack, adambcoleman.substack.com. Mm-hmm. I'm always writing for the New York Post and other publications.
You're everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere that I could possibly be.
Okay. Fantastic. And don't forget, everybody, pick up a copy of Black Victim, Black Victor. Okay, great book. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.